Hi, everyone. Very excited to talk today to Carly Taylor. She's a senior manager at Activision Call of Duty and responsible for data science topics, machine learning. And hi there, Carly from Vienna, Austria.
Hello.
Hey. So, we've been chatting before, and I'll be, wanted to have you on the podcast and super excited to have time. So many things we could discuss. But just because let's start with the Call of Duty topic. Just get right to it. We were discussing back the Metaverse and topics around Metaverse, and I kept thinking, you have this new Call of Duty DMZ mode, and to me, it's sort of a Metaverse, right? And this is actually a Metaverse where people are actually willingly like to hang out at, compared to these other less aspiring corporate metaverses where people are like, wow, that's weird. What do you think about the Metaverse and where it's going?
I think, so the Metaverse is such a hot topic word, and I feel like it's extremely polarizing. It's been interesting kind of watching it evolve from something that, a few people were talking about on blogs and on the internet into something that's in like earnings calls for these, major companies. Mm-hmm. And I think it's a good thing and a bad thing. I'll talk about potentially the bad things first, because I think that's what everyone wants to hear about anyway, because people are really skeptical. As I watched basically like Meta rebrand themselves, right? Like I felt hurt inside because I feel like the Metaverse has a lot of potential and it could be really cool. But when you have companies that people don't trust, founders and leaders that people don't really inherently like, I'm sorry, Mark, I'm sure you've heard this before, but people think that you're kind of weird, Zuckerberg, like you being the face of the Metaverse is not doing us any PR favors. So, I think when people see that, they think, oh, the Metaverse is going to be some dystopian universe with advertisements on every corner, and they're going to take over the internet, and it's going to be what we all fought so hard for the internet not to be, right? And a place where one company owns it, they own advertisements, everything is sponsored, and everything is monetized. And I think that being wary of that dystopian future is smart. Like, I think we should always be on the lookout for people who will monopolize and over monetize new inventions. But I also think there's this flip side of something that could be really amazing. And if we had been scared of that so that we squashed the internet to begin with, we wouldn't have all the amazing things we have now. And so I think there's like a balance of embracing new technology, figuring out how to make it work for normal everyday users, while also being skeptical of big companies that try to own a singular vision for what we're going to be using.
Right. And also there, I think it plays just the fact that they were absolutely adamant that because they were the best, social media company, they could just right off the bat be the best Metaverse company. And it's more like they broke the ice for everyone, where they could see the in part, and it's up for grabs for people to actually make it into something that others would love. So I think the future is there, but I think some billions went as advertising for it.
You're right. There was some arrogance there too, right? Like, well, we know how to build online communities, so it's natural that we should own this. We're going to take the name and make it our name. Like, we're going to own this thing top to bottom. And I don't know. I think that a lot of people get cagey when things like that happen, understandably.
Right, but actually there's a leadership perspective to this, which is people that are highly successful at things, especially, asymmetric, just through the roof success. They inherently tend to think, which is a sort of a fallacy, that, that they could be successful at anything. And that's the case. So it's not inherent to Mark. I think it's just like a standard error to make, to say, well, if I'm wildly successful at A, I could be wildly successful at anything I set my mind to, which, is just wrong.
Yeah, we need to give these people a little bit of imposter syndrome so they check themselves.
Right, but it's just, it's their billions to lose. So honestly, I think the intersection with gaming is, I think, something that where a lot of innovation would come rather than through this corporate, we try to push stuff to you, and we try to kind of monitor you and all sorts of things. So I think there's a successful way to do this, but I guess we'll wait and see.
Yeah. I think gaming has kind of been on the forefront of this without realizing it for a long time.
Right.
And like this idea of building a place where people can gather and experience something together that's not like real life, but it's similar and it's an online space where people can have this large concurrent experience and like go to a concert together online, right? Like I think of Fortnite. They're doing a lot of like non-gaming events, but they're able to bring a bunch of people into one experience together. And I think that just was kind of the natural progression of online games as people wanted them to get bigger and bigger. You know, you're like, okay, we have 6 people in this game. Can we get 12? We have 40. Can we get 100? Now we're up to like, 150, 200 people. What else can we do beyond this? That like, what about 10,000? Right? You end up, you're limited by compute. And like currently we have some technical limitations for things like that. But I think, thinking about that as the future of the metaverse is just like where you and 1,000 other people can do something cool together is way better than thinking of it in terms of where you and 1,000 other people can get your data harvested and targeted for ads.
Right. I was just thinking, I was just the other day a bank in Call of Duty in the Met, and just get the key to the bank in Al Mazrah, and I was figured, okay, what if there was an actual bank where I could actually, while hanging out there, do some of my banking things?
That would be cool.
Why not do that instead of try to push, just these unusual cooperations between, I come from banking, and I do a lot of business with data with banks and financial institutions, and it's just like you could see how this. You're moving more, this cooperation with all sorts of businesses, integrations really are the future. But then, it seems like gaming is one of those areas that really hasn't really overlapped with banking at all, right? So,
well, I work in security, and what's interesting is that I've noticed, I think like one person at Microsoft who talks about the metaverse from a security perspective. And I think if we were more mindful too about how, you work in banking, right? Like you have to be extremely mindful of how you protect user data, about the way you architect your systems. And with the metaverse conversation, there's a lot of like, we're going to play fast and loose. But I think people have learned from like data breaches and how, companies that weren't good caretakers of data, they've learned to be really, really, I'd say like skeptical of like, are you going to be able to protect me if I invest in this technology and I bring, my life into this thing that you've built? And I think that like there's a synergy there between these companies building a metaverse or something similar and companies that are very security focused, like banks,
right.
where they, they could learn a thing or two about making customers feel as though their data is going to be protected and as though like, there's a secure experience for them.
I mean, it's an entirely subjective opinion, not based on real experience. But you'd be surprised that banks were just only recently getting really security conscious. I mean, they've always...
Don't tell me that. I don't want to hear
it. Just because, recently I've seen a couple of years ago, right, where it's pretty clear that, those investments aren't just for something in the basement for them to kind of not mess things up, but are really strategic, right?
Yeah.
Because, how good should be its security? What does the bank CEO understand about that? And the answer is very, very little, close to nothing.
Yeah.
And then a couple of breaches happen over the years, and they're like, hold on, we really should be doing something here. And this also drives a little bit to, banks going into the public cloud where, where you can at least rely on, Microsoft and others spending billions on IT security. How good can you be, protecting your basement or your data center, the things are changing, but banks are certainly at this point, very advanced in this area. And we in Europe are very crazy about data protection in general.
Yeah.
We turn out to be right about a lot of things, right? I mean, if you consider globally that this GDPR is kind of like best practices rather than a nuisance that you should do for like no apparent reason. So I think there's quite an interesting thing now that where banks are like really being the custodians of data in a proper way is now kind of like why they are in the business for many things, because otherwise, I mean, it's not, I mean, banking is not something complex, right?
Yeah.
I mean, actually,
I mean, but banks led the charge for forever on physical security, right? Like these huge vaults with these like crazy, like blast-proof doors. But then when you think about digital security, it's funny to think that, you know, they lived in these areas that were literally like physically like castles, but digitally they didn't have the same security for a long time.
Exactly, because the technology just moved so quickly, and they just couldn't keep up with all of that change, right? It's one thing how you do IT security in the 80s and 90s, the early 2000s. Like every year now, it's you integrating all sorts of stuff and changing the tech stack every year and a half. Well, you better keep up, right? And how big should you be to be good at this, right? Because it's like at least like in a country like Austria, we have several hundred bank licenses, right? I mean, how good could each of them individually be in protecting data, right? So it's very interesting. But yeah, we also talked about in our discussions earlier about the intersection between compliance in banking and gaming, right? Because you're obviously also very interested in providing a good experience for the gamers, you know, for like anti-cheating, just everyone playing by the rules, and obviously the banks are super. This is where they actually have the best skills into knowing their customers and understanding their what is a good pattern and what is actually something that's suspicious. What do you think this is going in terms of capabilities in gaming, and how this, like, what are your thoughts on this?
So it's funny, actually. Someone told me this story last night, and I want to talk about it because I thought it was so interesting. They were talking about a game. I think it was like old school, like RuneScape or something a long time ago, where each little like brick that you lived on was one server, and you had all of your items. But when you moved to like another little world, your items were actually copied in memory from one server to another. And that's how you had continuity of the things that you owned as you moved through the game, right? And users figured out that if you were to like flag a couple of things or interrupt the process as it was copying, you could get 2 copies of your things because it wouldn't properly like delete the other copy. And so they were using this to basically like multiply their items. And now that you bring up banking, I'm thinking like, how crazy would that be if when I'm in Chase, I could like deposit a check and then do something and deposit it again. And like those kinds of duplicative errors are something that games have been dealing with, but I think like managing an in-game currency, right? Like it can be used kind of like real world money. Like it has value. Gold in World of Warcraft has like a physical, tangible value in dollars. But there's these weird arbitrage opportunities in games that I think banks have probably gotten a handle on. But like, how many gaming companies can say they have economists working for them? You know, like not very many. And so I'm wondering, like, as we learn about how to build up another economy, or you learn about how to like have best practices to not have like, I don't know, duplication fraud, or like you said, anomaly detection, like what can we take from the industry that they've already learned a lot about in protecting their money and protect our players and their experience and make sure that bad actors can't do weird stuff like steal your items or duplicate them and sell them to you.
Right. That's like,
it's really interesting.
Parallel currencies, you know, just interesting you mentioned, like, I just, something came to my mind where you remember early in the last crisis where you had, the airlines almost failing, and, actually the valuation of their loyalty programs was higher than the company, than the airline. And that's how they kind of rippled this to get funding. And it's nothing other than just a virtual currency, right? You'd have like an economy within a game where those points are just currency, right?
Yeah.
That has value. So getting that right took them many decades, right, to get to the system. So I think games being relatively newer to this in terms of time, it still have to polish a few things here and there to make it work. But you could have like yeah, real interesting applications of virtual currencies that are not within this, blockchain and all that stuff, but are driven through actual real based, economies within games, right?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
also combine it with the metaverse, and it's actually wouldn't surprise me in a couple of years if we have a game that has a loyalty program that's worth more than kind of the currencies of some small countries, right? If it just reaches such a global scale, right?
Yeah. Totally agree.
Yeah, interesting. Carly, maybe you can say a few words about your inspiring journey as a female leader in this. Just gaming is just such a male-dominated field, and you kind of broke through this glass ceiling. What were your experiences, or something you wanted to share with the people from the podcast?
Yeah, it's been a pretty incredible journey, I'd say, for me, of learning. I started my career actually as a chemist, and so I was pretty used to being in fields where there weren't a lot of women or like underrepresented groups around. And I remember going through undergrad and then grad school, and I had always wanted to see someone who I could look up to, who I felt like could be a mentor, or even just someone who was kind of talking about what it felt like to be one of the only women in the room. And I never really had that person. And so as I've progressed in my career, and now that I've moved into gaming, I've been really mindful about sharing that experience and what that felt like. And so that's kind of how I got started on LinkedIn about like a year and a half, 2 years ago. I started posting about my journey in data science as a woman, and what it was like, how I was learning, how I was like moving around in my field, the kind of people I was looking up to and admiring, the kind of technology I was using. It was really just kind of all over the place. But I really didn't anticipate that journey would resonate with so many people. But I guess I should have, because there was a need for it, because I had wished that I had someone like that I could, just follow what they were up to, and realize that there was a career for me that, I could also do that. And so now that I'm in gaming, I take that really seriously, because I do look around, and while I see the industry getting better, I do see a lack of representation in women, especially in technical roles in gaming, who are helping kind of like build the games and build the technology that drives our games. And I think there's a huge opportunity for us here as well, right? Like, I think teams are always better when there's diversity of thought and experiences, working in security, right? Like, if we have a homogeneous group of people who all think the same way, we're left very vulnerable, because we need to be creative and think about the kind of people, like think from the perspective of people who are going to try to like harm our game or harm our users. And so it's been a really fun career. I would say that it's been a journey, especially on LinkedIn. It hasn't always been smooth sailing. There's always like haters and people who, tell you that you don't belong in games, or that you're a fake gamer. I get that one a lot. It's really weird. But yeah, I'd say that overall, I think it's been positive. And my goal has always been to just show people you could have a career here. You could also do this. And so I hope that I've at least been minorly successful at that.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And I'm glad you also mentioned underrepresented groups, because it's sorts of groups where they wouldn't get a voice, right?
Yep.
And I was just thinking of I saw many years ago. I don't know why it came to me now. The sketch on YouTube with Jim Carrey, when they asked him how he want to be when did he know that he wanted to be a great comedian, right? And he said, I was watching. I'm just recalling could be completely off, but he was saying I was watching Robin Williams when he was a kid, and he was explaining with the voice, like, I'm watching all these, just being on top of the world, best comedian in the world. In his act, he's like, and I was thinking, I could do that. Point. Watching some scene.
And then he did.
Yeah, that doesn't strike me as particularly difficult. I could do that. So I think encouraging, just having role models and people to look up to. Many people could say, "Hey, I can do that." It's just something. So what would be, for example, your advice to younger people breaking in, particularly, data science, the data field in general? what's your view on how this is going to develop? Because data didn't used to be such a discipline.
Yeah.
Like statistics, and you had like, I don't know, software engineering, but data can kind of establish itself as like with a whole subset of fields. I mean,
yeah.
In the grand scheme of things, relatively recently. What do you think? How do you think it's going to develop, and how would you advise the younger folks?
My advice this year is probably drastically different than advice I would have given last year. I'd say that I think the field is changing so rapidly that I'm seeing a lot of people graduating with like master's degrees in data science and, degrees in AI. And I think that is still a good career path. But I also see people almost like software engineering used to be, where you get this degree and think like, okay, where's my 6-figure salary? And the degree isn't enough anymore. And it used to be that you could get a role in data science just because you took a statistics course one time and knew how to write in Python, right? And like, I think those days have passed us by, sadly. But I think what online courses and master's programs and even PhD programs are still selling people is this idea of all you need is this one credential and everything else will fall into place. Right. And I think because of how competitive the field has gotten, that's not necessarily the case anymore. And it's going to be interesting to see this next generation, what they're doing when they have these very specialized degrees and they come out of school, and how they're actually applying this and what roles they're going into. Because I think like the generalist data science of 2 years ago is dying because the field is getting so vast that no one can know everything.
Right.
And now when I meet with people who are looking to either get into data science or who are getting close to the end of their studies, I tell them very specifically, you need to pick, you don't have to decide on it now, but I think you should be thinking about what you want your specialization and your vertical to be in data science, because you can't just be the notebook generalist who can solve every problem. And I think that I see that in job descriptions as well. They're getting more targeted. They're saying, I want someone with NLP experience or this specific deep learning experience. And it's not just like, we need someone who knows data science. Right. And honestly, like those really general job descriptions are now kind of a red flag to me, because I'm like, do you know what this person will be doing? They can't do everything. And so like not having a well-formulated idea as a business of how you'll apply data science can set up your data scientists to fail. It can set up the business to have a bad experience with data, so maybe they pull back. And I think it can end up in this negative cycle where if you try to be a generalist, you try to hire generalists, you try to have the generalist team, you're going to end up in a place that maybe you don't want to be. So I think specialization is where it's at. I think a lot of people's skills are becoming more T-shaped, where, you do have a breadth of knowledge, but you're really hyper-focusing on the depth. Like for me, like I said, I work in security. So like a lot of anomaly detection, unbalanced data, like those kinds of algorithms. And that's my specialty now. And so I wouldn't go take a job as an NLP specialist, because I don't really like language processing. I don't know anything about it. I'm not up to date on the state of the art, which means now that I can work in gaming or banking. So, I've kind of pigeonholed myself, but here we are.
No, exactly. No, and I think the generalists, if you end up with the generalist job description, they probably just end up doing, low quality data engineering instead.
Exactly.
And instead of being super focused, it's also interesting that you're saying this from a perspective of because let's say gaming is a tech industry, is a high tech industry, and other industries that we observe, like in my line of work, where but not only banking, but also some of these classical industrial companies, multinational. Mm-hmm. There's quite a disconnect between still, which is just surprising, but it's still there, between where the data, the business should be at this point in 2023 and where it's actually at. Yeah, where it's at is, we have a few initiatives here and there, maybe a mild success, but we really are deeply stuck into the early 2000s. And mm-hmm. it doesn't, it's quite a huge change for like classic companies to become to actually become it's overused, but data driven, right?
Mm-hmm.
And over there, like just give an example, like metadata management and having really good data modeling, where you could, they didn't want to invest so much in this because again, they got these board people, colleagues, they're saying, where's the value? What do I get?
Yeah.
And now at least you reach a point where you tell them, if you don't get that, you're not doing ChatGPT on your data. They're like, oh, that's why I need this. And I'm like, yeah, that's why I need to invest in this huge, new data warehouse and data landscape. And you have to just demolish your warehouse and, build a new warehouse. Think of it this way. And only then you can do the fancy stuff, right? And this is, at least my perspective seeing this in Europe is slowly but surely moving in that direction. We're not there yet. So there's a lot of opportunities for younger people in data engineering, and there's quite a few who would say, well, I want to do the science, but let me get my hands on classical DevOps data pipeline stuff, and at some point once I understand the data good enough and know the business domain, and only then I can start doing basic things like random forests and whatnot, just play around with the data. So I think I see your point with hyper specialization, but one interesting thing I wanted to mention to you, because it said these specialized degrees is. Do you not think that there might even a lot of these degrees that don't say, well, if you say degree in mathematics or in chemistry and computer science, well, there's a lot to take that's generic, right? Mm-hmm. But if you're trained in like AI, NLP, well, you're not a generalist anymore. And if things change, you have to redo the whole thing. So the question is whether this degree is more leading you into thinking that you can get a 6-degree salary right off the bat, or whether you should, do away with this formal education for these fields altogether. I'm always skeptical. I'm a trained computer scientist, so I know how this works. What's your view on this? Because you're a chemist, it's a switch to go into anomaly detection in
It is. I had to sell that too. It was so funny because something I wasn't good at when I graduated was talking about how I could repurpose everything I learned as a chemist and apply it to data science, right? Even though now I think that a lot of us are more mindful of like alternate degree paths to get into data science. When I was first starting, people were like, oh, computational chemistry, what does that have to do with this? But I think now if you were to say computational chemistry, people would be like, oh, that's like, a computer science degree that's applied to chemistry. And it's like, okay, that makes sense.
Right.
But before it was really hard. And I think people were still learning what kind of people they need to solve these problems. I think honestly, though, the horse is out of the barn a little bit with regards to these degree programs. Like, I don't think anyone's going back because I think the boot camps, the master's degree programs, the PhD programs are making so much money off of this because they can still say like, oh, data science is the hottest job of whatever, you're going to get this cushy gig and you're going to be set for life. And so I don't think there's any going back from that. But I do think I don't think it's inherently bad, right? Because basically what they've done with these data science programs is they've just repackaged a couple of computer science classes and statistics classes, and you end up probably taking the courses that will help best prepare you for data science. Where I think that things are falling apart a little bit is like anything, because academia is singularly focused on either publishing or being like building state-of-the-art algorithms or building just state-of-the-art like everything publications for academia, for other academics, there tends to be a disconnect from industry.
Right.
And I think that there are programs that do this very well, that partner with industry and are solving very applicable business problems. But I do see a decent number of people come out of these programs with a very thorough theoretical knowledge, but they couldn't, find their way around a business if you gave them a map. Like, they just don't understand anything about trying to make money, or what does it mean to actually be insightful for someone who works in marketing, right? And they don't have these skills that would enable them to really, really drive deep value to a business. And so they end up kind of spinning their wheels. You give them a problem and they spend 3 weeks, 3 months, if you let them, going down these rabbit holes of algorithms and trying to find the best solution and something that would be pretty cool, but it doesn't actually help anyone. Like, what's the ROI on 4 months of extra work for 1% of extra accuracy? Like, it's just not there. But you have to switch the way you think about things when you come out of academia into a business setting to really be effective. And I don't know if that's up to academics to prepare students for that. But I also think that the disconnect between what industry wants and what academics are working on ultimately just harms students because they don't know. How would they know, right? And so I think if you are going to go into a program like this, I would look to see, like, does the program partner with the industry? Or if you're going to work in a lab, do they have industry advisors that come in and talk to them? Like, how close are they to the pulse of what's really being done? And that will help you better understand, like, how hard is it going to be for me to get a job, or am I going to have to do the work afterward? Because I see tons of people who graduate and they're like still having to do projects. They're still building their portfolio. You know, they're still trying to get unpaid internships because they didn't have the experience they needed from their degree program. And so I don't know. I think it's a mixed bag, but I don't think there's any going back. But I do think we can educate people who are signing up for the programs to just be a little bit more discerning when they look at a program and how it's run.
Right. But it's such an excellent piece of advice for them to just be more humble, especially if they come out of the PhD programs. The experience is, I mean, oftentimes, not necessarily every time, but oftentimes is the case where they think, okay, I'm actually over-equipped to solve the problem.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, but you're not overly focused on ROI, and you're really not humble enough to know that you don't know anything about the business yet.
Mm-hmm.
To apply your skills and your thinking and your in your knowledge. So it's just just like, I don't know, normal school doesn't prepare you how to do basic finance and mortgage and personal finance. The same.
Yeah, no one taught me how to write a check.
But in a similar way, some of these university programs don't really prepare you for real life and solving real problems. And if you could solve it with a linear regression, and that's already good enough, don't overdo it in the next step in the iterate. Yeah. It's just I don't know whether that could be taught per se, but you certainly. By over focusing on some very concrete skills or even tech stacks that are currently hot in the market, these folks come out and think they're the hottest thing, and the question is, if they were to step into another field for 3 years in return, how relevant that knowledge would be? And the answer is, I think after 4 years, if they haven't really done anything, let's say they went into finance, and in 4 years, they come back and they'll be like, wow, almost nothing is the same. Yeah. Now, and then fall back on basic things like statistics, basic computer science, and then figure out how the new thing now works. Right.
Yep.
So,
who I see best prepared for this? And I will admit, I used to be very skeptical of them because I had a technical master's degree and I was getting beaten out for jobs by people with MBAs. And I was like, what did they learn that's better than what I know? And I'm realizing now, the more I work with people who have like this deep business specialization, is that they're very good at finding insights for a business because they have a business degree, and like that's what they focus on. And I've found that the most effective data scientists that I work with are people who have like an undergrad degree in computer science and an MBA, or they have like a business degree and a computer science degree, and they've found that intersection. And I keep telling people now, I feel like I'm like, giving advice from 20 years ago, from like the 80s. I'm like, if I had to choose between getting a master's in data science and getting an MBA, you could do one in 1 year and get networking connections and meet a bunch of people, or you can do 1 in 2 years and end up with some cool publications, but you maybe aren't going to be competitive in the industry. I'd almost say, like, if you're not in love with getting the data science degree, go get an MBA. Like, you're going to be able to come into a room and like command attention and give insights. And then your technical background, it's like unstoppable. But I don't know, maybe it's just the people I've worked with who are kind of sitting there.
I have an MBA. I can share my experience because
yeah. Was it worth it?
So I was like, I can tell you an even better hack. I also have a CMA, which is like a certified management accountant.
Okay.
Much more, which is like CFA, very similar.
Okay.
I'll actually encourage people, if you have more like the MBA is great for what you for networking, just learning from leaders in the industry, where they'll tell you, look, if you have an HR class, I had my HR class with one of the IBM great gentleman. He was I think one of the top 3 people of IBM in Europe.
Nice.
And Austrian person, and he's like, look, we had an HR class. He's like, let me tell you how you read the book. You don't be on the test, but let me tell you how HR works, and how it works by having 4,000 people under my belt, and those experiences are super valuable, right? Because if you don't then get into the actual settings where that's the knowledge you recollect. You don't start recollecting the MBA. Typical MBA stuff is like what the consultants like, the 3 C's, the 5 B's, the 7 A's, these kind of things. Like, no one cares about that. But say, hey, here's how they solve, like when you have like, I don't know, industry relations, all that kind of stuff, like taking this HR class, excellent. And many similar things, right? So for this, MBA is valuable. However, if you get something like more like a technical degree where it's actually a certificate, then you have a lot of hard skills that a lot of MBAs just don't have. There's a lot of people who are very good at relationshiping and meeting others and all that, but then you'd hire them and you'd expect them to be productive and
they don't do
what they actually do, right? If I were to hire an MBA, I'd be super skeptical. If I had to meet someone,
but you have a computer science degree and an MBA, which is what I guess I'm saying is like that. Those 2 things I think are really powerful. Do you not think so, or would you say do the CFA or something else instead?
To be honest, I would have done just a CMA or CFA and the MBA, because again, it's a similar content but more compressed to actual certifiable skills. In most of the MBA programs, you'd get people out of there, and again, they might be for those that are successful on their own. So there's 2 aspects of this. I mean, like, if you want to be an entrepreneur, like if you want to do your own stuff, you definitely don't need an MBA. You don't need an MBA to meet the people. Just get some other degree where you can actually meet customers, right? Because it just sort of gets you into this. If you work in the corporate world, how can you be the head of something like a VP? And this is kind of your typical. And honestly, a lot of this is hot air, especially if you come up with prior that with a computer science degree, and you can tell who talks and who works.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, but there's just like this. At the end of the day, ideally you could be both, right? But if you were to choose, then just be good at work. And the MBA certainly doesn't give you the technical skills for that, right? And for some programs that if you have to take it in 2 years, like especially if you have to quit your job, I mean, really think 2, 3, 5 times before you do that, because you could do like a certificate thing, and if you want to be employed somewhere, they would know that you got certified, and there's just like your code deployed, right? Compiled and deployed without errors. You could do those things, and you just didn't go through school by paying exorbitant fees. So I see your point with the combination of both. That was certainly my angle, but I think it's again, if I may share a European perspective, we're kind of all overeducated here, which then kind of inflates the whole thing.
Yeah,
it's not really necessary. I think if people were driven, if they love, for example, let's take the data field, right? If you want to have a bit of computer science knowledge, if you dive deeper into this. Just get the relevant classes you would get from an MBA. But if you can afford it and spend the time and whatever, it's definitely not to not doing. Just think several times before doing it, right? So
I think where I struggle with the highly technical people is that they're so smart, but I can't put them in a room with leadership and expect good results. Like, can they build a PowerPoint deck? Can they clearly convey what they did or where they're going? And I think that maybe it's not even getting an MBA. Maybe it's that these data science programs need to force people to take business classes and communication classes. Because it's like, you can be so technical. You can be the smartest person. You can write the best code. But if you can't talk about what you built or put it into perspective for someone to care about it, does it even matter? Like, because at the end of the day, you need your stakeholders to get buy-in to what you're doing to continue doing what you're doing. And I see that failure over and over again. It makes me feel bad because a lot of hyper competent people, I think, burn out or aren't as successful as they're used to. They're like, I was top of my class. How am I not getting promoted every year? How am I not like on the career trajectory to be a VP already? And it's like, because you suck at communicating.
Well, that's the good case. The bad case is if they just think they're entitled to do so, because because if you're measured by just succeeding in school, and then you think, okay, I did that, my job is done. Let me, hands off, just like just like that. Then it isn't really true. You have to think about what is it that you did that made you successful in school. In the beginning, you showed up on time, you complied with everything, you were conscientious about completing the tasks, you were curious about learning all sorts of things. If you just do that afterwards, you're definitely on the track to be promoted. But just don't discriminate against others, and especially people coming from other fields or people without degrees that are actually focusing on delivering value. Yeah. And they should be the ones to get promoted prior to you just expecting to be promoted. So there's certainly we see this, and that's it's almost like that's why, especially if people with Harvard degrees, and they weren't really the best performers, right? And really, and Harvard degrees aren't that common in Austria, right? So and the reason for this is, well, you might be super smart, you're really extraordinarily smart, but are you delivering the results? Are you focusing on the output that's required? That's not always the case. So it's excellent pieces of advice from yours.
We're gonna have a bunch of people they're like, do I get an MBA or not? I'm like so scared.
Yeah, you have a great time if you did, but after you're done, you'd be like, okay, kind of if you come from a technical field, the complexity of it is underwhelming, right?
I see. Yeah.
Finance classes are going to be the most complicated thing, and they're trivial compared to anything you've ever done. Yeah. I'm very sorry to say that, but it really is.
A CFA is hard to get though. Like I imagine, studying for that, it's a huge accomplishment.
That's why I went with the CMA, which is kind of it's. I actually am a president of the Austrian chapter of the CMAs, so I do a lot of discussion with these guys, and but there's also other certificates, right? Yeah. So it forces you to go through all these accounting, finance, business management. One of the interesting things that actually is quite. It's not difficult per se, but it forces you to think about a lot of things. Is taking business strategy classes, right? It's just business strategy in general.
I wish I had taken more strategy classes.
It applies.
My job is becoming very strategic, and I've had to self-teach a lot of it because I just didn't have, where do you take those classes,
Just like this old saying we had, back in the day in Bulgaria, and where there was like when you go to when you read the book, it's if you wrote it, right? But if you have to take the exam as if someone else read it, right? Experience with having strategy books, because it'll be like, if you read it, be like, yeah, obviously reading the page, makes perfect sense. Everything clear. But then if you have to take the exam, it's like someone else read it, right?
Yeah. You're like, wait, I forgot everything.
I recommend to you to some business content and business classes in any format. And if you want to go with an MBA, it's perfect. It's perfect too.
Oh, I'm done with school. I'm over it.
Yeah. I reach a point in your career where it'd be like, there's this executive programs and whatnot. They're all good. Anyone listening, I don't want to bash it, just saying that just like anything makes sense to review advice, look at it from a rational point of view. Yeah.
Maybe we need to make a data science MBA, so a highly technical MBA.
There is
millions.
No, there is that in Europe. Many universities are starting to offer something like an MBA with some data science. Okay. But if you come from another field, like if you come from, all these things are good, but what I would say is they're just, for me, it's like a suggested minimum, right? If you really want to deep dive into the field, I'd much rather hire someone that can show that they've spent time on their own thinking about it and just sat somewhere and got.
Yeah. There's no silver bullet, I guess. Lots of paths, but no perfect one.
Not a perfect one, but chemist. I wouldn't want to interrupt you, but I wanted to inject that the Call of Duty chemist, the DMZ chemist, is there.
The Call of Duty chemist. I wonder if that handle is taken on Twitter.
Call of Duty chemist. Yeah, we get the chemist from the DMZ that you have to.
Yeah, the chemist and the gas that you have to kill. Yeah. I wasn't able to do that mission. I was like driving around in there trying to find him and run him over.
I did it with two friends who are much better at this than me, because I'm just a very, very, very casual gamer, and they kind of handed this to me just as a team, which shows again, gaming, team play, leadership.
Yeah, exactly. You're only as good as your team.
I was just bossing them around and telling them what to do, and they were actually doing the work, so I felt super bad afterwards. For telling him, you go there, you do the chemist is here. I was like shouting, right?
You should get the badge as like the general.
Right? A lot of parallels to the actual business world, right?
Yeah.
Kind of in a leadership position. And then the team does the job for you, and then you have to be grateful for their work. Yeah. We ran for 46 minutes, Carly. Is there, before we wrap up, what else is on your mind? Do you want to share with maybe future plans and something that you're working on? Connection broke.
Uh-oh.
Oh, you're back. The connection. Now you're back. You're back online. Can you share something you're working on, or before we wrap up, some of your future plans?
Yeah, for sure. So I actually just launched my first business page. So I've been a business owner, which I guess I don't have an MBA, so what do I know? But I finally just launched the page for my business, Rebel Data Science. Please give it a follow if you haven't already. I'm trying to figure out like what my plan is going to be for that page. I think what I'd like to do is really highlight some awesome women working in AI, and then also just some educational content around AI so people can feel better prepared for things like the metaverse, all the stuff that you and I were just talking about. It would be awesome if you give it a follow. I also have a new mascot. Her name is Marsha. She's very cute. She's a little marshmallow controller. So give it a look. It's super fun. I think it'll be a good time. And I think that is pretty much it. All
right. Carly, thank you so much for being a guest at the Specific Data Strategy podcast. Great to have you virtually from here, from my office in Vienna. And talk to you soon. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Dankeschön.